Welcome back to Lamento. It's time to continue a little more, hopefully without any interruptions today. I'm not gonna play for too long, but I decided to record at least one part so that we have some more backup, Just to be safe, Konoe peeked around outside. He thought the twin cats may still have been there, but he didn't feel any presence nearby. Rai told him they'd practice, so they headed to a field on the outskirts of town. Is it only me or do I sound a little muffled? Oh well. Pocono said that it would be a good place to practice. The open space had decaying rocks here and there, and the grass had grown densely. They were probably the ruins of a building left by toucans. In the middle of the glade, Konoe turned to face Rai. A cold wind passed through the two cats.
双子の猫とやり合った時に思い知っただろうが、サンガにはサンガでなければ対抗できん。一刻も早くその能力を安定させるべきだ。
Makes sense.
その前に言いたいことがある。
なんだ?
While staring at the Rai's blue eyes gleaming in the moonlight, Konoe pursed his lips. Okay.
俺はあんたにいくつか話しておかなきゃならないことがある。
言ってみろ。
話したら後には引けなくなる。
ほう。
Aww. Konoe's gaze fell to his feet.
俺の体、この呪いは多分俺たちが思っている以上に複雑な何かがある。仕組まれてる。俺は試されてる。
誰に？
わからない。見えない何か。だけど大きな存在だ。俺の命なんて片手で簡単にひねり潰せるぐらいの。あんたは俺のサンガの力が欲しいだけかもしれない。けどそれだけじゃ済まない何かが俺には起こってる。
Stopping with these words, Konoe slowly inhaled. The air entering his lungs was cold. He turned his eyes from his feet to Rai.
だからもし本気で俺に関わるつもりならあんたにもそれを背負ってもらうしかない。
Fair.
多分面倒なことになる。あの双子の猫だってきっとそうだ。それでも
And that was why, for some reason, he wasn't able to find the words. Konoe lowered his head again. There was no response from Rai. The silence became heavy. Unable to raise his gaze, Konoe looked at Rai's feet instead. The white tail didn't move an inch. What would he do if Rai refused? There was nothing that could be done. If they parted here, they would walk down different paths tomorrow. Like how it was in the beginning. Before he met Rai, Konoe was always alone. It would just go back to how it was. Even so, Konoe was afraid of this for some reason.
顔を上げろ。
Rai's tail started to sway. In response to his heightened senses, Konoe's ears flattened. He lifted his face. Rai calmly looked his way.
前にも言ったはずだ。呪いごとき騒ぐほどのことでもないと。その大小も関係ない。今さらそんなことを危惧してどうする。すべてもう始まっていることだろう。
He gave a small nod.
だったら後ろを振り返るな。さもなくば足を取られて命を落とすぞ。お前をサンガとして育てると決めた時点で、俺の進むべき道も始まっている。いいか？
Rai stepped forward, Gazing into his blue eye, Konoe could not look away.
余計なことを考える暇があるなら前を見ろ。本当の敵は呪いでも大きな存在でも悲劇的な運命でもない。そうやって己に迷うお前自身だ。負けたくないなら強くいろ。
Rai insisted, with the moon as his backdrop. Stay strong. That voice echoed distinctively in his mind. Then Konoe felt his anxiety and fear slip away and vanish. What remained afterwards surprised him. Rai was strong, not only in the physical sense, but in the ability to resist anything the world threw at him. A strength that could leave an impression on another. What was there on the other side of that? Konoe wondered.
分かったら始めるぞ。話は宿に戻ってから聞く。
That's fine. Konoe looked at Rai anew, as though he just snapped out of a dream. Rai turned his back and put some distance between them, then turned and crossed his arms.
歌を習得する手立てはいくつかあるが、サンガは必ず持ち歌があると聞く。
持ち歌？
おそらくサンガとして自然に身につくものなのだろう。まずは歌を呼び起こしてみろ。
どうやって？
歌が発現した時の状態をできるだけ詳しく思い出せ。
He didn't understand even when Rai put it in that way. He controlled the urge to argue and tried to remember the situation when he sensed his song for the first time. Closing his eyes, Konoe took a deep breath and exhaled. The darkness of the memory concealed his vision. He extended an invisible hand to explore it. Certainly, that time. Rai's business rivals flew into a rage and attacked him. Pain had surged through his body and Konoe screamed. They fought, scratching and biting, and then, sent into a spiral of pain, Konoe was washed away in a muddy stream, unable to breathe. He thought that he would drown in feelings. At that point, he heard music. And then, sent into a spiral of pain, Konoe washed away. Oh. That melody. Sorry. That...
ダメだ。
Konoe forced his eyes open again. Rai watched quietly with his arms folded. Konoe noticed his forehead was beaded with sweat, and he began to pant. At that moment, he definitely felt something. Konoe knew something was there. But when he tried to remember it, his body shied away. From deep inside of him, there came a sensation like that of being uprooted, and he felt fear.
焦るな。全く何も感じることができなかったのか？
いや。
少しでも何かを感じたなら、次はその感覚を追ってみろ。
Relying on Rai's words, he closed his eyes for the second time. Breathing slowly, he pursued the lingering reverberations of the previous feelings. Extending a hand, Konoe caught the tail of the memory. The whirlpool of pain, the muddy stream, the melody he'd heard, the fear dashing through his mind. Konoe couldn't escape it. He wanted to open his closed eyes. The memory then became very vivid. It was as if Konoe was actually there. It might consume him like this. Even the burning of his nerves seemingly revived. Konoe nearly collapsed. Sweat trickled down all over his body. A white flame blazed. He began to see the choppy images of something. Long, fluttering clothes. The poet? I need to drink some water. Ugh. Now the bitter pain vanished, as if it had been just a lie. His field of vision was enveloped in a white flame. However, it wasn't hot. It was a flame similar to light. The sound of the rumbling, muddy stream became distant, and instead, music began to sound constantly, growing stronger and stronger. The poet played but could not be seen, but Konoe knew it was him. His heart was filled with warmth. Relief spread through him. Konoe was able to breathe. Then suddenly, he felt warmth. The Sanga's song wasn't to bestow power. It was not meant to be forced out either. Konoe's stomach became very warm. White flames rose from within him and wrapped him up, sending strength to every corner of his body. The fragments of the melody were unlike anything he'd heard before. This was his. Oh, I love this song so much. Ooh. When Konoe opened his eyes, he saw tendrils of light flowing from his body and moving to Rai. Rai's body glowed intensely. But then Konoe heard a sound like crackling in the air, and the light faded away. The white flame as well as the melody vanished, bringing a silence as if nothing at all happened in the field. Yet the heat remained inside his body, and his heart still raced. Rai gazed at Konoe quietly, before finally opening his mouth.
お前が目を閉じているとき、途中から歌が聞こえ始めた。ほんの一瞬だが、歌が流れ込んできたとき、力がみなぎるのを感じた。
成功したのか。
そういうことになるな。
Just then, Konoe felt his strength leave him. His knees were shaking and he could stand no longer. When Konoe was about to tumble down, he felt something support him from the back. When he looked up, Rai's face was before him. As it was expressionless, Konoe did not know what he was thinking. Reflexively, he averted his eyes as he became aware of his situation. He had been caught in his arms. Rai's arms.
平気だ。話せ。
He
was about to hurry and get off when Rai opened his mouth.
サンガとトーガは信頼が深ければ深いほど能力が高まる。互いの心が合わさっていなければ、個々の能力がどれだけ高くても意味がない。
So basically, you're telling me if we're not gay, it's not gonna work. That's okay. At the end of Rai's sentence was a mix of laughter and ridicule, and Konoe felt his anger boil.
俺相手じゃ無理だとでも言いたいのか。
お前じゃない。俺の話だ。
Ah, yes, of course. Not understanding what Rai meant, Konoe frowned. He's saying he's not gay. Rai let go of Konoe and turned away. A strange, awkward feeling floated in the air. While gazing at his back, Konoe was puzzled. He never knew what Rai was thinking. While Konoe was still baffled, suddenly Rai turned around.
特に問題がないなら、今日のところはもういいだろう。次は剣の稽古だ。
剣？
サンガだから剣は不要というわけではないだろう。戦えるなら、腕を上げておくに越したことはない。
Konoe thought the same. Even with a cat like Rai around, Konoe wanted to become stronger. If he had a choice, he would rather be taught fencing than becoming a sangha. But first, there was something Konoe wanted to ask.
さっきの何の歌だったんだ？
お前の歌か。
ああ、
特別な変化は感じられなかった。トーガに力を与える。いわば最も基本の歌といったところだな。
そうか。
Konoe's voice sank. He didn't feel like that was a good thing.
基本こそ重要だ。特性がない分使いやすい。それに、歌はこれからも増えていく。増やしてもらわなければ困る。初めてにしては上出来だろう。
At Rai's words, he could only stare in amazement. Rai said that Konoe did well. No way. He didn't think that he'd ever hear anything like that from Rai.
なんだ。他に聞きたいことは。
Rai drew his long sword. Similarly drawing his own sword, Konoe secretly felt his impression of Rai change. Upon first glance, Rai was a really arrogant and unpleasant cat to be around, but he was different than that. While he was indeed selfish, Rai wasn't as rigid as Konoe had thought. Rather, he was very helpful. Though his way of helping was still pretty selfish as well. As they crossed their swords, Konoe thought of this for a while. Crossing swords, you can take that in another way as well. By the time they finished sword training, very little remained of the night. It would soon be morning. Leaving the glade and heading to... Oh, Jesus, not getting a hiccup. And heading to the inn, Konoe suddenly stopped and looked back. He thought that he could hear something. Behind him spread the pitch-black forest. Standing alone in the darkness was a shadow. It did not reflect light, but it could be seen pretty clearly. The one seizing him, strained vision. His strained vision was the poet. Konoe's ears perked up and he turned to face him. His tail swayed with a strangely elated feeling. His long clothes billowing, the poet plucked the strings of his lute. Bit by bit, a melody reached Konoe. Konoe was about to rush up to him when a song echoed in his ears. With that withers and sorrow I rode to spring. It points to the depths of the forest, where a wise man lives in a shrine. A wise man in a shrine. The words were accompanied by a soft, strange sense of transparency. The voice filled Konoe with a faint euphoria. An image spread forth into his mind. The all-seeing eye, a wise man in the depths of the forest. The poet stopped plucking the instrument and then pointed to the forest. The forest? In the depths of the forest, a small shrine, the all-seeing eye, a wise man. Could it be?
Oi.
As his shoulder was suddenly tapped, Konoe jumped up in surprise. All of the fur on his body bristled on end and his tail powerfully lashed against something. When Konoe turned around, Rai glanced at him while scowling. It looked like Konoe had smacked him with his tail.
何をしている？
今、
Looking back towards the forest, Konoe was baffled once again. He didn't see the poet.
夢でも見たか？
違う。
Even though he said this, Konoe did feel like it had been a dream or an illusion.
行くぞ。
While he walked along, Konoe kept glancing back. The poet, a fleeting reality, a mysterious presence. Just who was he? In addition, that song before was probably... Once they arrived at the inn, Konoe gave Rai a summary of what had happened with Firi. Rai said nothing afterwards, only nodding to show he understood. Even when he couldn't tell from appearances, Konoe thought that, strangely, it did not seem to have affected Rai. As he curled up on the bed, that song continued to echo through Konoe's head. The song of the illusory poet. He slept little for the rest of the night, reciting the lyrics in his head over and over. The next day, dazzling rays poured in through the window with the moon of light high in the sky. Ever since he woke up, that song from last night was still stuck in Konoe's mind. Having already repeated it in his head many times, Konoe even hummed it to himself. From the time he had woken up, he was still concerned about the song from last night. Although he thought about it for a long time, Konoe still couldn't wrap his head around it. But he did have an idea as to what it meant. Maybe it was... Konoe thought about asking Rai.
呪術師のことなんだけど。
He said, sitting up and fixing his clothes.
なんだ
Clasping the buckles on his coat, Rai turned
昨
around.
日の空き地あっただろう。あそこの町とは逆側にある森。
That white bushy tail made a large swing. Rai stared directly at Konoe.
どうしてそんなことがわかる
昨日空き地から帰る時に歌を聞いた。
歌
俺がよく見る歌うたいの猫がいて、それでこう歌ったんだ。すべてを見通すその眼指し示すは森の奥、祠に住まう賢人よって。それで歌うたいは森を指さした。
そいつはその後どうし
知らない。あんたが俺に声をかけたら消えた。
Rai's gaze dropped to the floor. He was silent, as if he were lost in thought. His white tail restlessly swayed back and forth.
信じられんな
Of course you don't.
でも俺はそいつを何回か見てる。カローでもランセンでも。
信用できる証拠でもあるのか
Evidence for a person being there? Are you for real?
それは。
Konoe's eyes fell to his feet when it was his turn to reply. In truth, he also doubted whether he could believe it. Still, Konoe lifted his face.
証拠はない。けど俺はあいつが敵だとは思えない。直感でそう思う。
ただの願望じゃないのか
違う。
Rai's icy gaze came down on him. Not one to be outdone, Konoe glared right back. Though light flooded the room, the atmosphere of it turned frigid. Ugh. His stare clashed with Rai's. Looking away meant admitting defeat. Konoe clenched his fists, feeling like he was about to break a sweat when Rai gave a small sigh.
強情だな
You don't say? Did you just realize? The frozen air between them cracked open at his condescending voice. But Konoe let out a deep sigh as well.
どっちにしろ呪術師の居場所はわからないんだろう。
そうだ
なら闇雲に探すよりはずっといい。
True, I mean, at least it's one kind of a lead.
罠だとしたら
その時はその時だ。今考えることじゃない。
Rai lowered his face slightly and scoffed.
やはりお前は早死にするな
あんたに言われたくない。
At Konoe's retort, the corner of Rai's mouth curved up in amusement. All them booths. In the end, they decided to look in the forest as the poet's song instructed. Konoe and Rai left the inn and returned to the field of the outskirts of town. On. It felt like it took so long when walking at night, but it wasn't so bad during the day somehow. Before, it looked like the glade was overgrown with lush grass, but Konoe could see now that it wasn't. But past the glade, all he could see was the forest, still as imposing in the daylight as it was at night. Because he'd already spent so much time in the forest, he didn't really want to go in, but Konoe had no choice. He and Rai set foot into the lush foliage. The forest was thick like that north of Kaoru, but it was different from the forest that was attacked by the void to the south of Ransen. A small road meandered through the woods, and unless one veered very far from it, it would be hard to get lost here. The air seemed different too. It seemed heavier in the forest where the void lurked, like something was watching them.
祠か。
あ
To their left, moss-covered cliffs jutted out, but other than that, the scenery remained invariably the same. They continued to walk in silence, wary of their surroundings. Rai abruptly stopped and stared at a specific point.
Oi.
Following Rai's gaze, Konoe also turned his head. There was a place where the edge of green rock face crumbled off. As if purposely hidden, tall grass grew around it.
道がある。
Konoe turned towards that cliff. While he pushed through the grass that uncomfortably grew up to his face, Konoe felt a strange muddy sensation under his feet. Ew. Rai's white tail stood taut as they walked between the gaps in the face of the stone. Accordingly, Konoe's tail did so as well. His eyes were glued to the scene before him. A hole. It was a small shrine. I mean, I was close. Oh, we're here, right? Yeah. It's not too far off from Ransen. If this is Ransen, they didn't really come that far. There was a hole in the face of the rock, bordered by a black inscription-like pattern.
ここか。
あ
A shiver ran through the base of Konoe's tail. He was filled with both tension and odd acceleration. They had finally reached their goal. It was that kind of feeling.
分かっているとは思うが、用心しておけ。
Rai stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Konoe carefully followed him into the shrine. Ooh. Inside it was dark, but they could travel on with just the light that entered from outside. The air was damp with moisture, but the walls were dry to the touch. Both were cold, so it didn't feel intolerable. Their footsteps echoed through the narrow space. His ears picking up even the smallest sounds, Konoe proceeded on, keeping his guard up. There was no sign of a presence at all. No. There was probably someone inside who was deliberately hiding their presence. With such a feeling, Konoe became increasingly cautious. After a while, he saw a faint light ahead of them. To be exact, it was reflected light. At the end of the cave, there was a right turn, and a torch was raised on the wall immediately beyond this turn. Before them stood an altar and a cat beside it. Both Rai and Konoe stopped at the bend in the corner. They saw the cat's back straight and ahead.
貴様が先見のできる呪術師とやらか。
Rai's strong voice shook the stagnant air. The cat who stood at the altar turned around to face them, his clothes rustling.
おお、よくここが分かったの。
A calm and low voice contradicted his carefree words. He seemed the same age as Rai, or maybe a little older. Clad in many ornaments, his pale green eyes narrowed as a laugh carried through the air. His ears and tail were grey with white tips. There are no white tips here. Receiving the light of the torch, his face was bordering with a deep shadow.
ここを知る者は今はほとんどいないはずだが。
I'm not surprised. He swayed his tail gracefully and approached Konoe and Rai, unabashedly examining their faces in turn. The cat seemed to be having fun. His eyes were sparkling with a mischievous light.
これは面白い。昨晩の星回りで珍しいことが起きると出ていた。
珍しい。
なるほど。答えろ。貴様が呪術師か。つっけんどんな押すよの。そうせくな。焦れば何事もうまく立ち行かなくなるぞ。
He seemed to speak in archaic speech. He was also filled to the brim with self-confidence, yet remained elusive. His gaze darted back and forth, then stopped on Konoe. The shaman narrowed both eyes.
特にお主が愉快じゃな。なんともはや、これは。
何かわかるのか？
わかるも何も。
At his excessive stare, Konoe averted his face. He was hiding, but perhaps this cat already knew, or maybe he really could not tell. When Konoe thought about it, he felt the urge to leave. Then the shaman suddenly extended his arm and removed Konoe's hood by force. Reflexively, Konoe put a hand on his sword. However, the shaman did not heed Konoe's aggression. The mood changed completely. A sharp light flashed in his eyes, which were narrowed in amusement. Different from Rai's, they were like a myriad of needles. In response, Konoe held his breath.
なるほどな。ほれ、他もあるんじゃろ。
These others probably meant his tail and the markings. Konoe felt the urge to resist the suspicious spirit of the cat, but he had come to ask about his body after all. Konoe silently presented his tail before his body and took the gauntlets off of his arms.
Ho ho.
The shaman grasped Konoe's tail and his arm. Konoe almost cried out when his arm and tail were grabbed, but he endured and choked back his voice. Rai gazed at his development in silence.
間違いなく古くから伝えられる呪いの発言じゃな。
Nice. With a nod, the shaman raised his face. The sharpness in his eyes had vanished without a trace.
それで、一体何をしにここまで来たのか。その呪いを解く方法だ。呪いを解く方法？
The shaman echoed with a light inflection. He laughed as if he'd been faced with something terribly funny.
これはまた随分と愉快な発想じゃな。呪いを解く方法か。面白い。
方法はある？
知らん。
Oh.
そもそも解くことができるのかどうかもわからん。無駄足ということか。
The shaman turned to Rai with bored eyes.
だからそうせくなというに。本にせっかちなオスじゃのう。ま、お主らがここへ来た時から気になっておることがあってな。
Before he even finished speaking, the shaman's face drew before Konoe's eyes with an intense vigor. Konoe was speechless before his twinkling eyes.
お主の背後に大きな影が見える。
影？
そうじゃ。とてつもなく強大な力。それがお主の魂を手の中に捉え、檻のように閉じ込めておる。心当たりがあるのではないか。
When he asked this, Firi's face came to mind right away. The existence that Firi had spoken about.
どうして俺を何のために？
さてな。ただ、お主は少々変わった星のもとに生まれておるようじゃ。未来が闇に包まれておる。
The shaman narrowed his eyes as if to focus. He was staring right at the middle of Konoe's face.
見えんな。いや、見えんというより、ない。未来そのものがない。
未来がない。
Moving away from Konoe, the shaman nodded, smiling calmly.
死ぬのか。
そうではない。すべてはお主の行動次第ということじゃ。
Konoe was becoming more and more confused. He'd never given something like the future much thought until now. Tomorrow you could either live or be sacrificed. Those were the things Konoe concerned himself with. However, when the future was thrust at him like this, uneasiness rose from the pit of his belly. The verdict of death could have been better than dealing with these unpleasant vague feelings. His vision wavered and he gripped the altar. Konoe's fingers touched something that seemed like decorations, and something crossed his mind for an instant. Blazing crimson flame. This was a memory. The memory of something.
No.
In a panic, Konoe quickly drew his hand back. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see Rai's eyes narrowing. The shaman's eye slowly brushed over the ornaments on the altar in Konoe's face.
何か見えたか。愉快愉快。どれ、もう少し見てやろうかの。
As the shaman stood before Konoe, he smiled and held both his hands out. Konoe reflexively pulled his hands away. He couldn't read what the shaman was thinking at all. Though he appeared calm, Konoe found the cat to be rather creepy.
なんじゃ耳を下げて。悪いようにはせん。より詳しく見るだけじゃ。呪いを解く手立ては無理だとしても、無駄足にはならんじゃろ。
The shaman threw a narrowed look at Rai for a second. Rai stayed silent without a change of his expression. The shaman took Konoe's hand once again. This time, a wind passed before his eyes. Rai thrust out his sword, dividing the shaman and Konoe. Without flinching, the shaman gave Rai a sidelong glance. Sharp light dwelled in his eyes.
何のつもりじゃ？今までの話、本当なのか？嘘だとでも？信用できる証拠がない。
I mean, he's right. Taking a step back and pushing the sword away with his fingertip, the shaman chuckled.
ならばお主は何があれば信用する。目に見えるものがあればよいのか？それとも多くのものの賛同か？逆に問おう。お主がお主である証拠はどこにある？この現実が現実である証拠はどこにある？
Well,
もしかしたら、お主はずっと寝床にうずくまり、長い長い夢を見ているだけかもしれん。世界はすでにうつろに食らい尽くされて、荒れ果てているやもしれん。よいか。何をもって信用とするか、現実とするか。それを決めるのは自分自身じゃ。周りではない。
The cold air strained like a thin sheet of ice. The occasional dry popping of the torch sounded like something foreign. Both Rai and the shaman glared at each other in silence.
わかったら、剣を収めよ。
A low tone gently shattered that thin ice. Rai didn't break eye contact, but he sheathed his sword.
だいたい決めるのはお主じゃろうて。なあ。
Konoe realized his gaze was on Rai. He wondered if Rai had met his eyes intentionally. What the shaman said just now was true. Rai understood it too. But rejecting everything meant you'd have nothing left. With so many things happening, what should he believe and what should he doubt? Only Konoe could decide that. Credible evidence It was just one of the many things one needed to take into account.
何か見えるのなら知りたい。教えてほしい。
その意気じゃ。何が大切なのか見失わないようにせんとな。
Nodding and chuckling in satisfaction, the shaman took hold of both of Konoe's hands. This time, Konoe meekly obeyed. The hands of the shaman were clammy and awfully cold.
さあ、目を見てごらん。じっと見つめるんじゃ。
Green eyes peered into Konoe. Although he felt a strange force drawing him in, Konoe kept looking straight ahead of his own will.